I'd like to step back a little bit. We have such a range of students here, some of whom are seniors and will know the answer to this question, others who may not. Can you give a thumbnail sketch of what a distributor does?
What do we do? The primary function is we receive the master and artwork from a label and manufacture it for them. So in basic terms, we take the last step of the creative process, which is finalizing the art and the music, and turn it into something that is carrier driven. In this case, these days, mostly CDs, though we do quite a bit of vinyl as well. The second thing is we then solicit that to the remaining stores that are in, and we only distribute in America, so it's just US based. We go out and present the music to those that buy the music for the stores, those people that determine what the stores carry. And of course, that's a presentation. It's not different than building a case for a client or you're getting your day in court. The industry still puts out about 700 full lengths a week. Most record stores have fewer than 30,000 titles in their store. If you do the math quickly, you're all probably better than this than I am. 700 a week roughly equates to 36,000 titles a year, and the average store only carries 35,000 titles. So you can see that you have to make a case to be there. So that's the other part of it. And then the rest of it is actually just the warehousing, the shipping, the invoicing, the billing, rendering statements to the actual labels, and then, of course, paying.
So you act as a wholesaler, the wrong term, between the label and the retailers?
Yeah. The label determines what the price is going to be. We get a distribution fee. It varies per label. And then we sell it to the retailer. The retailer generally buys it from us at about 30% less than what the suggested retail is, 33 to 35% less. So, a $15.98 list record will sell for, I think it's like $8.40 or something like that. And the retailer decides then what they're going to charge the consumer. Right. In some cases, they'll charge the consumer $16.98, and they keep the margin. In some cases, they may charge literally what they buy for it, or even less, determined by what their business model might be.
So you're selling to the record store at $8.40, and you've paid what for the record?
Well, I haven't paid for it because I actually never possess or own it. The music is always owned by the label.
Right.
I have some manufacturing involved in it. I'm sure you've all read the Rolling Stone articles where they break out why is a CD $15 when it ultimately raw materials wise is 38 cents. So from my standpoint, it's 38 cents, whatever it costs to make it. Of course, the answer to that question is the vast amount of money that it takes to market the artist is what determines the price.
One thing that I think is lost on the population for sure, and unfortunately a lot of people in the record industry, is co-op. I think my contention is that co-op and what you mentioned regarding shelf space has far more to do with the difficulties that the record industry is facing than downloading. Can you speak on co-op a little bit?
Well, co-op, the term doesn't, I've been in the business for 30 years and I don't know when it was actually cooperative, but it's short for cooperative. The idea being that, we go to a retailer and say, hey, we'll give you $20 if you kick in $20 and we'll both spend $40 then and we'll try to sell this record. Well, in 30 years, I've never seen anybody actually kick in. It's all driven by the money that comes from the labels, and so it's not cooperative really. It's really a subsidy for advertising. So for example, how it may work is, and probably the best and most visible advertising you might see is the Best Buy Circular. The Best Buy Circular goes in, I don't know how many newspapers, it goes to I don't know how many people, but it's in excess of 70 or 80 million people see that circular every week. It has 10 or 15 titles in there. Those 10 or 15 titles are paid for by the distributor, which ultimately then is paid for by the label to be in there. It's a highly selective process. You have to make a huge case to get in there to be able to spend the money to be in there. And then they advertise the project. So why do you do it? Well, it reaches 80 million people. So if you've created demand for the record and then you want to reach 80 million people, that's one vehicle to use. A more grassroots example of co-op might be a listening station. So you go into a typical indie store, you put on the headphones, In order to do that, we've paid for the slotting, really, to get into the station, which actually pays for the technology that allows you to listen to the record. So in a way, it's really just us subsidizing for the retailer the ability to help promote the artist to the end consumer.
You said something important. You said, you can get into these programs potentially, and if you've created demand, then it works.
Yeah.
And this is lost on a lot of people.
Yeah.
In fact, I've run enough labels and worked with enough artists where they feel that once they have distribution, that's the holy grail. They can then kind of sit back and get the record in the stores. Is that true?
Well, we have a guy in common, this guy Joe Regis, and Joe Regis, we have a rule in our company. It's the Joe Regis rule, and the rule came from, hey Andy, I can't find my record in any stores, so nobody can buy it. And the answer was, Joe, you haven't created any demand for their artist, so the stores don't want it there, so nobody's coming and ask for it, so I can't get it in there. He's right, of course. You can't buy it if it's not there. The problem or the dichotomy in that whole situation is you can't get it there unless there's demand for it. So it's a bit chicken and the egg, but what it really comes down to is, and I talked about the stores before, there's 35,000 titles in a store, there's 36,000 titles coming out every year, there's going to be choices made. And generally what happens is the promotion, and particularly the pre-promotion of an artist, is going to determine whether the store brings the record in, how they display it, and how prominently it's displayed. So you earn your ability to be featured, basically. And there are some labels that do it wonderfully, and there are some labels that don't do it quite so well, and those that do it wonderfully do great. And those that don't are going to have to learn very quickly, or they're not going to have retail space.
Who does it wonderfully, and what do they do that makes it wonderful?
Well, I mean, in our world, and I'll speak in the ADA thing, Sub Pop, for example, is a company that has been around for a long time. They've had their ups and downs, obviously famous for having discovered the Seattle scene and captured that so well. But, Sub Pop had a very typical indie history. Did well, found some, truly life-changing artists, sold the company, lost touch with their audience, spent money excessively, made a lot of mistakes, nearly went out of business, scaled way back, re-entrenched themselves to the original ideas that they had for the label, and now are probably doing better than they've ever done before. They work way ahead. We get music probably 4 months before that record's in the street. Retailers get the music, writers get the music. They listen very carefully to what people say. They may elect after putting it out not to put it out. I mean, once they get a consensus opinion from somebody. They're very artist-driven. They listen very carefully to their artists, and they're really committed and passionate about their music. They do a great job. You mentioned Better Than Ezra. Interesting story, and slightly off the topic, but it's worth talking about the differences in just how music can be discovered. That in that case, that was actually Elektra found this band that had done about 25,000 units on their own in this area,
right.
Just kind of traveling, selling out of their trunk, doing things on consignment. And they actually signed the band with the idea, okay, they're not really ready for prime time yet, but let's sign them, put it out through ADA, give them some chance to grow, and we'll see what happens. And the very first thing that happened is that song, and I can't remember it now, somebody's going to know, Good. Gets on a station, gets on another station, goes on another station, finally gets on K-Rock in LA, which is to this day still probably the most influential station in the country. And before we could even ship the record, it was a hit, and it was our first platinum record. But it can happen that quickly. It more typically happens in the way the Bright Eyes happens,
Years and years.
This is the 5th record from a guy that's 24 years old, literally was starting, playing, doing stuff when he was not 13, even in college,
yeah, right.
With a band of friends that just kind of hung out and did what they did, found an audience, and it just expanded on that audience over the years.
2 questions. A, do you ever consider individual artists, or do they have to be with a label? And I know that gets blurred. And what does it take for either of those, a label or an artist, to get a deal with ADA?
ADA is primarily a distributor of labels, meaning that we won't partner with a label unless there's a label there. We are not a label. We just do distribution. We don't have the inherent functions of promotion or publicity or any of the rest of it. We do all the things that are the distribution functions that I described earlier, but we are not the label. And as a result, we've done very few label direct type deals. We did do a deal with a band called
artist direct or label
artist direct type deals. Most artists know exactly what they want to put on the record, but have a very difficult time trying to figure out who the audience for that record might be. And frankly, that's what the label's job is. Mm-hmm. We need the label in place to tell us what to do, because we don't conceive of marketing plans. We act out the marketing plans that come from the label. There are some labels that are really artist-driven, and we talked about Annie DeFranco.
And OAR.
OAR is one that we work with, that frankly were so impressive that I broke the rule. And they basically, were, again, guys that came out of college. They were originally from the Baltimore area, went to school in Ohio, literally toured Ohio, or as far as they could get away from school on the weekends and get back for class. They were superstars in Ohio. I mean, you put out a record there, they'd put out a record, and it would literally debut in the top 5 in Ohio and nowhere else.
Yeah, and I tried to sign them too.
Young guys, smart guys, driven to perform, driven to do something different, broke the rule. We sold just a little under 800,000 records with them.
800,000 records?
Most of which was below the top 200, most of which is just them out touring all the time. Now, of course, they're out of school, they tour constantly, they've become a huge band in that world of performance-driven music, and it's all been done basically without a hit. And if you can survive in this business by finding an audience without being driven by a hit record, you've got a career. If you've got a hit record, you have to survive that hit record and find an audience. You've done a hit song. A good example in my life was Hall & Oates. Hall & Oates was somebody loves Hall & Oates here? No. I don't think so. So
I do.
I kind of like them, actually. But Hall & Oates didn't sell any records unless they had hits on their records. If they had hits, they sold platinum-level records, million sellers. If they didn't have a hit record, they didn't sell anything. You got the other side of the coin with Annie, who can regularly do 300,000 or 400,000 records. Bright Eyes, good example. OAR now, a good example. Bands that can actually reach an audience without mainstream media, without a hit. That's a business. That's a career.
And their catalog continues. So, and I don't want to ask you to give proprietary information, but if you've got an artist that sold aggregate 800,000, do you pay monthly or quarterly?
We pay monthly.
Pay monthly. So, what's a monthly check going to OAR from you guys look like?
Well, it's whatever they sold that month minus my distribution fee. My distribution fee for those guys is probably about 20%.
Right.
So they're getting 80% of what the retail price is, which is a hell of a lot more than if they were signed to a major label and getting 12 points minus deductions and advances. So they're making a lot of money.
Would it be fair to say they've made over $1 million?
Oh, each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to get some range of what can be done on your own.